Hey everybody, welcome to Retire with Style. I am Alex Murguia and I'm here with my co-host Wade Pfau, and we have a very
Hello.
special guest, Rob Cordeau. How was that, Wade? That was to spec,
Very,
wasn't it?
very monotone. I thought you were trying to
Yeah, I
sound like me
did.
there. The Wade impression.
No, I
Smooth.
just wanted to see if I can do it like Jack Parr, like, hi everybody.
Hey, everyone.
Sounded a bit
Welcome.
like an MC there. Very nice.
Thank you. All right, Rob, take it away. This is a twofer. Could be a threefer, but we'll probably keep it to twofer. With regards to Roths, and this is within our arc on tax efficiency and the like. Rob, where did we? Well, Rob or Wade, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I mean, so in the last episode, we started this conversation on Roth conversions, and there's so many topics we haven't touched on yet that we've made it a two-parter. But yeah, where do we want to pick up at that point? I think one area that we didn't address yet from the previous episode was if you do a Roth conversion, you're going to have to pay taxes. So where do you pay the taxes from? Could you talk about your experiences with that, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, we'll choose whatever seems optimal. If someone has non-qualified assets and it's efficient to do it that way, we'll go that route. You can pay it from the IRA, but it becomes kind of a circular calculation. The more you pull out, the more you have to pay tax on the
It's
amount
like
you
an
pull.
algorithm for that. That like some
Yeah.
yeah.
And of course, we never want to pay taxes from a Roth account, so that's sort of out of the question. So, yeah, it's unique to each client, right? But yeah, it kind of is situation dependent a bit.
Yeah, and actually with the broader kind of YouTube world or all the direct to consumer type advice out there, sometimes there's this statement that you should never pay tax from the IRA itself when you're doing a Roth conversion. That's not true. I mean, ideally, you could pay from your taxable brokerage accounts, but if you've already spent them down, there's no problem. Now, if you're under 59 and a half, there could be the penalty, but if you're over 59 and a half, there's no real problem with paying taxes from the tax deferred account,
Right.
as you said.
Yeah, and if the delta was large enough between, say, the rate that we're paying, if we're paying at a 10% rate, let's say, I might be more inclined to go that route. Typically, the clients we're working with have a mix of taxable accounts, tax deferred, and tax exempt. So usually there's sufficient funds to pay from a non-qualified, taxable
and
account.
and and it's funny how it's somewhat of a framing thing, because if you are paying from taxable accounts, if they say no, just pay from taxable, not from Roth. Well, you've already been taxed on the taxable account, and then you've invested the difference, and then you're going to be taxed again if you're pulling out funds that have capital gains on it. So to some extent, to Wade's point, yeah, IRA should be fine in,
Yeah.
in terms of a candidate.
Yeah, it's generally a little better if you have it to pay from the taxable account, because the general story about tax efficient distributions is you want to spend those taxable assets earlier, relatively
Yeah,
speaking, because of their ongoing taxation, unless you're going to leave something
but
as a legacy there and have a clear
but the
opportunity for
conclusion is the
spending.
same, which is like if it has to be from the IRA, it's still not kryptonite. It's still not a
Right,
no-go zone.
right. And
Right.
that's in contrast to some of the advice out there that say never do a Roth conversion if you have to pay taxes from the IRA. That's
Yeah.
simply bad advice.
Yeah.
It's
I
case
would
by
agree.
case, of course, but
Right. And you're getting some benefit by pulling it out. An IRA by nature has an embedded tax liability in it.
mhm.
So the more I pull out of it, the more I'm reducing a future tax liability. I'm reducing a future RMD. So I agree 100% with your approach, Wade.
Yeah, it came up in the last episode, but to emphasize, and we didn't say specifically, but the advice you give, like, should I contribute to an IRA or a Roth? And the answer is, well, if you have a lower tax rate today than in the future, put that money in the Roth, pay the taxes today. If you think you're going to have a higher tax rate today than in the future, so in your peak earnings years, take advantage of the tax deduction today and put in an IRA. That same logic applies to the Roth conversion decision. If I think I can pay taxes at a lower rate today, do the Roth conversion. If I think I'd have to pay taxes at a higher rate today, don't do the Roth conversion.
Yeah. I agree. And you know, I'm glad you brought that up. That phrase, that explanation of the timing, sort of a heuristic, a rule of thumb, whether or not it makes sense. We've seen that in literature, and every financial advisor worth his or her salt can spout that off. I I would submit that it should be a little different than that. Rather than compare your tax rate in the year of conversion, and if it's lower than your tax rate in retirement, it makes sense to convert. It's a subtle difference, but it's important. Compare your tax rate in the year of conversion to your tax rate in the year in which you think you will be taking these dollars in retirement. So it's a little more precise. And the reason I look at that is, in our experience, clients go through phases in retirement, right? They go through, well, we've talked about the go-go years, the slow-go years, the no-go years. So the spending might change for that reason. But the taxation and the tax brackets might change based on, have they started Social Security yet? Has one spouse started RMDs yet? Have both? Have they got to that point where they're really slowing down on spending yet? I mean, we'll have clients go through 4, 5, 6 different phases, and some of those result in different tax brackets. So it's a nice, easy thing to say, compare your bracket now to retirement, but your retirement bracket isn't just one number. For a lot of clients, it's dynamic throughout the whole spectrum of retirement. So I try to help clients to see that they might have some opportunities in the future with lower brackets in retirement that they're just not thinking of presently.
If I'm
Right. And
listening,
again, we did have a number of episodes on the pitfalls of this, where it's not just those brackets that you're looking at, but the impact on Social Security benefit taxation, the Medicare surcharge, IRMA issue, the how your capital gains stack, long-term gains stack on top of ordinary income, and that stacking issue. So really looking at that holistically.
so
But yeah.
so then to Wade's point and to your previous point, then you're not necessarily looking at the average tax bracket in retirement. You're going to try to get as best as you can an estimate of these funds, more or less. You're going to use them in your mid 80s. Again, I'm just making it up. And in your mid 80s, this is most likely your tax bracket in consideration of all the other stuff that's happening, as opposed to just, hey, you're more or less going to be at this bracket on average throughout retirement. That's
Exactly.
effectively what you're saying, right?
Yeah. And if you think about the normal sequence, the conventional wisdom of draw from taxable first, tax deferred second, tax exempt last, if we're converting from converting from tax deferred over to tax exempt to Roth, I like to view those as the very last dollars that I would have spent in my IRA.
Yeah.
Right? So we have software that will tell us when we're depleting the tax deferred bucket. And it's common for it to be up in the 80s, or actually, it's very common for a client never to deplete their tax deferred bucket, and the Roths go to the next generation. So now I'm talking about converting dollars that you would potentially be spending in your 80s or 90s when spending is lower, when the bracket might be lower. Or we spend a lot of time talking about the next generation. What brackets are your kids in? What do they do for work? Tell me about their situation. We're trying to assess whether the kids are in the 22 or are they up in the 37% bracket. We're just trying to get a sense for what makes the most sense for, do we convert a lot now, some now, not at all?
That's an excellent point. It really is.
Yeah, then let's talk more about that. Like if you're at the point where you think there may be a legacy left to the next generation, then these conversations become intergenerational in nature. And there were some changes with the Secure Act that impact this, particularly the for like adult child beneficiaries. They're generally going to be subject to, they used to get a lifetime stretch on their inherited IRA. Now it's 10 years where they have to have that account spent down in a 10-year window. And if they're inheriting that in their 50s, they may have to spend that account down when they're in peak earnings years, highest tax rates of their lifetime. And so I think you're kind of getting to that point, but like with this estate planning issue, like have you had those conversations about, well, we got to consider taxes on your beneficiaries as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Especially as the IRAs get larger and larger. And if the number of siblings, children, is smaller, if we have one child receiving a seven-figure IRA as an inheritance, um, that's going to be seven figures dropped on their 1040 as taxable income. That's going to push them through all the brackets up to the top bracket, right? So um, there is some planning there. Like when we have clients who have an inherited IRA, we have a spreadsheet we build that looks at the next 10 years. We estimate their bracket in the next 10 years, and we actually come up with a mini distribution plan for that inherited IRA over the 10-year period to try to optimize where we think their brackets will be, what's going to happen when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act sunsets, if it does, all that sort of calculations are going into that. So we try to do as much as we can on that. It's tougher with our clients because their children may not be clients of ours. So we're going kind of hearsay from the parents. What do their children do for work? Getting a sense for what we think they might make and what bracket they might be in. So it's, again, there's a lot of broad assumptions being made to try to figure out.
Because you've done these for a while now. I don't think you're ever going to be precisely correct. But I don't think that's the goal either. I think you just want to be directionally correct. Looking back at, you've done this for years and years now. So looking back at, I nailed this, or I was off on this. What's your like anecdotal sense?
Yeah.
And Rob is one of the most humble folks I know, so he's not gonna embellish his record here. I'm just more curious. I don't expect anyone to hit this, but what do you think?
No, I mean, I think we talked about some of the home runs in the last episode, right? Where you really nail it when it comes to converting and serial conversions and filling up brackets. And, but I can't even say if my record's been correct because I have to fast forward another 20 or 30 years to go through their whole
you still have
life.
many in the bank. And you look at these, and you course correct all the time. So it's not like it's written in stone either. But I was just, if someone tells me this, this is going to happen 20 years, you always view it with that, okay, we'll see.
But this gets back to a comment I made in the last episode about how Roth conversions are like hedging, right? We are trying to hedge against future tax bracket increases, right? Or future increases to our own personal bracket. And this led me to a thought experiment that I want to perform on the two of you because I am interested in hearing what you have to say. So hear me out. It's going to take a couple minutes, but it is related to the Roth conversion discussion. So I want you to imagine that I'm going to give you each $1 million, and you have to use that in wagering on the outcome of the World Series. Okay. Now the World Series, for anyone listening to this, we are in the middle of the World Series right now. We're recording this in October. The Dodgers are playing the Yankees. The Dodgers are up 3-0, 7-game series. So you can wager your $1 million. You can bet for one team or any combination. You can split it up between the two teams. And there's no like point spreads or anything. This is very basic. It's binary. If your team wins, you double your money. If your team loses, you lose 100% of your money. There's probably a name for that. I don't gamble, so I don't know what it's called. But so that's the kind of basis for this discussion. One other thing to make it interesting that this isn't play money. Imagine we've just had yesterday a cataclysmic market event. You've lost all your retirement money. So this $1 million actually really means something to you. All you have is Social Security and whatever you walk away with from this game. And one other caveat, if you're a Red Sox fan, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So your Red Sox friends will never find out that you put some money with the Yankees. So, Wade, you're a numbers guy. Oh, and I'll give you one other factoid. In the history of the World Series, more than 100 years, no team has ever come back from a 3-game deficit to win a 7-game series, more than 100 years. So, Wade, you're a numbers guy. Are you going all in with the Dodgers? Are you splitting it? What are you doing?
And you do have to allocate all of the money to
all the money. Yeah, you can't pull in it. You got to bet all $1 million.
And
but
we're
you can
starting
split
from the
it.
point that the Dodgers
You can split it any percentage you want.
3-0. So yeah, I mean the odds are really at this point, statistically speaking, the Dodgers would win. Although you may want to hedge your bet somewhat by not going all in with the Dodgers. I'd probably be thinking like maybe 80% of it would go with the Dodgers. The other 20% with the Yankees as a way to hedge the risk on that.
Okay. All right. I'll get back to that in a minute. So, Alex, what are your thoughts? How are you betting?
Well, I think out of the 40 instances in which a major league team has led 3-0, I just read up on this. Only one has come back,
Oh, there's
correct?
been one.
Red Sox, yeah.
The Red Sox, that's
2004
right.
ALCS, that's right.
And let me see here. Extremely low odds. The probability. I'm trying to read my ChatGPT answer in the slowest way possible.
That's right. I did the analysis. ChatGPT said between a 2 and a 3% chance that a team could come back. So 97 to 98%.
I cut it off. I must have hit stop before it was reading it, but that's exactly while you were saying it. I was typing it. I even put the microphone on mute so you wouldn't hear the typing.
Yeah.
What is the chance? It's a low prob. Are you going to come? Is the answer? This is the probability of a Roth conversion tax increase or something like that.
No. It's that. Well, you didn't tell me what you're going to bet yet. How much?
Oh, how much would I bet?
Yeah.
I was
How
so
much
busy trying to cheat that I lost track of the thing.
The whole, he missed the
There's
whole.
a 0.8% probability.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you wanted me to bet $1 million, it's the Yankees 4%. This is me without even thinking if I'm doing this right. A million, I would put 996,000 on the Yankees and 4,000 on the Dodgers. I don't know, something like whatever.
Did you mean to do the other teams?
Yeah, the other way around. The other way around.
Yeah.
And the team that's up 996,000.
So if the Yankees pull it off, it's not impossible. The Yankees pull it off. You and your wife just have Social Security income scraping by on it. And
no, I won $4,000 as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've got 8,000 now.
Yeah, you got 8,000.
So you each engaged in some hedging.
So we're talking about the magnitude of loss is huge for me here.
Yeah, if that rare event happened. But I want to change it up just a little to illustrate something. Now let's bet on the World Series in the year 2044, 20 years in the future. We don't even know the players, the teams. You just have to bet American League versus National League. Okay, same rules, $1 million. What's your split going to be? And as a factoid, American League has won 57% of the World Series. National League has won 43%.
Are we playing with a DH? Are we playing with a DH?
Yeah. For your purposes, yes. Play with a DH. Wade, go ahead.
Yeah, if you
What's
go
your bet?
50-50, you don't lose anything. You'll end up always just...
You'll end up with $1 million, right? You lost 500,000 on one side, but you doubled your 500. So you walk away with $1 million, right? So you split down the middle. How about you, Alex?
If 20 years with a DH, I'm going for the American League.
It's going for the American League.
If there's a DH. No.
57%.
Right. See, and the idea is we all hedge, right? Because why do we hedge? We hedge because we're uncertain of the future. If you had a crystal ball and you could see who was going to win with 100% certainty, you'd put $1 million on the Dodgers or the Yankees or whoever, right? But as things get more uncertain, we hedge even more, right? We go out 20 years on this. We don't even have a data point. We don't even have a single player to look at. So we say, all right, I'm going to split it down the middle, right? Because I just don't know.
Yeah.
And this is where I go with Roth conversions, that I just don't know with certainty whether tax legislation is going to change and the bracket for this client that I'm working for is going to be higher in the future or lower. I don't know if one of the spouses is going to pass away and they're going to be a widow or a widower in a higher bracket or a lower one. So since I don't know those things, it's beneficial to be humble and to say, since I can't predict the future, let's just not go crazy. Let's not remove the thought of Roth conversions. They are powerful and a great tool. So let's engage in them. But let's also not take the approach of let's convert our entire pre-tax IRA and go crazy with this thing.
You're right.
So we're hedging in both directions because we simply don't know what the tax regime is going to look like 20 or 30 years in the future.
No,
So
I think you're right. I think people. I love the way you posed it, which to me, if I'm interpreting it, is people. It builds on this recency thing where you take what's happening now and you just extrapolate it, right? And so by pointing out the current Dodgers Yankees, you're thinking about the who's pitching and all this kind of stuff, right? At the end of the day, it's just a guess, but you give yourself the sense that you know what's going to happen. But then the Roth conversion is really the 40 years later, now make that same bet. But what happens is when you pose it like that, we naturally think, well, I don't even know who owns the teams, much less, who's the starting pitcher or anything like that, right? But what you're getting at, I think, is that you're making the Roth conversion decision. Don't make the Roth conversion decision with your view on what's happening right now and the taxes, things are going to go up, things are going to go down or whatever, because really you're making this decision for what's going to happen in 30 years, let's just say. And if that's the case, you really have no idea, regardless of who's we have an election coming up, regardless of who's going to win in this upcoming election. That's really what happens. But people make that decision 30 years in the future with the information they think is happening right now that will never change. Hence, you're saying, let's not be silly about this. Let's just hedge. And that's it. And I think that's the key takeaway that I'm taking away from the very beginning, which is it's just a hedge strategy for your taxes. It's no free lunch.
Yeah, I think that sums it up perfectly. It's just that humility that we don't know. There are black swan events that happen. We talked about could we see a flat tax environment? These things could throw a massive monkey wrench in all the work we did in trying to get ahead of the curve and convert at 22 or 24%. There could be a massive change that we weren't expecting. And again, without a crystal ball, I can't go crazy and just convert everything I have and push myself into higher brackets to do so when I don't really know future tax rates. Or I'll give you another black swan event. What if there is a cataclysmic market event and your portfolio loses 50 or 60% of its value? And then you went to a great deal of trouble to convert a bunch of stuff to Roth when you could have spent a lot of years in a lower bracket because you simply had less money to work with in retirement. I mean, there's a lot of the whole idea of a black swan event is you can't predict it. It's not easy to predict. So I think hedging when it comes to Roth conversions, again, as much as I love Roth conversions, and we do a lot of them every year, it's being measured in our approach for how much we choose to do.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's kind of the idea of directionally doing some Roth conversions. Maybe a good idea. If you knew exactly how long you're going to live, exactly how much you need to spend each year, and whether that's health expenses that are deductible, if you knew exactly what market returns you'd get every year, if you knew exactly what the tax policy would be each year, then you could solve this. And so here's how much I should Roth convert every year over my lifetime and have the exact precise answer. Now, as soon as you recognize you don't know any of those variables, it no longer becomes possible to be so precise and so hedging,
Exactly.
but moving in the right direction.
So I think we've got a good overview of, okay, the conceptual underpinning of a Roth and things, why doing it, what are the considerations, the tax play, the hedging, this or that. Where do you see on the flip side, where do you see things go sideways?
Yeah.
Besides, okay, you ended up being in a higher tax bracket in retirement, not lower. That we've discussed.
Yep. I think it's just failure to notice a low income year and take advantage of it. Right. So occasionally we come across clients, usually prospects, who come to us and we see that they've had opportunities for the past few years, but they haven't been taking advantage of it. So not recognizing they're in a low bracket and should have been converting. We already talked about
and this could be someone, they may not even know it, but they have a career change in their early 50s. And they're going to start up a business or something. And they've got 2 years where I'm putting in the work to build up the business. Well, those 2 years, even though this isn't an issue that you're not going to really look into until your 60s, those are 2 years that are quote unquote freebies, if you will.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So missing those opportunities, that's probably the biggest mistake I see. Overconfidence about your understanding of where tax rates are going to be in the future. We talked about hedging, over converting, right? Which usually is a corollary of overconfidence about future tax rates. So those are probably the biggest areas of mistakes that I see. And just to your point, Alex, it is, and yours, Wade, it's more directional. It's making sure that we are engaging in it to some extent. Our goal isn't to convert 100% of the pre-tax if it's a large account. It's to just position us better in the future, to give us more tax flexibility. That's something we didn't talk about. Just, it really does open up some doors, especially if you don't have any Roth. So to be able to convert, if you've got taxable, tax deferred, and now you're creating a third bucket by performing those conversions, it just creates a bucket for you in the future that if tax rates go up, or if there's a situation where you do need to manage your AGI, manage your taxable income in some way, having that tax-free bucket to pull from can be really neat for flexibility purposes. If Congress does spike up income, change the rates in a particular year, whatever it is, it's just nice to have that flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we never clearly said this episode, but right, the value of the Roth is when you have to meet expenses in retirement. It's a resource that does not go into your adjusted gross income, so it's
right. Yeah,
helpful.
You may want to say that again with a little more vigor, Wade, because I think this is quite important. And it's coming across like, hey, by the way, asterisk. I think this needs to hit you over the head. So why don't you?
A distribution from your Roth does not enter your adjusted gross income, and therefore it's not part of your taxable income, and it helps you avoid problems related to Social Security benefit taxation, Medicare premium surcharges, preferential income stacking, Affordable Care Act subsidy losses, anything along those lines that can be potential issues in retirement.
Yeah, and for us as planners, when I've got a client that has all three of those buckets, it just opens up so many doors.
All three of those buckets, just to be clear for consumers listening, so
right,
they can start conceptualizing.
Taxable.
Right, the taxable, so like joint trust accounts, the tax deferred, so IRAs, Roths, 403Bs, TSPs, and the tax exempt bucket, the Roth type accounts. When I have all three of those, we can do a tax projection for a 67-year-old and take a look at where they're at and say, well, yeah, maybe we'll pull a little bit from Roth to just keep your income below that break point for IRMA or for whatever else it happens to be. So we can more closely dial in exactly what we want for an AGI. And that can be really powerful for, Wade, to your point, prior episodes you've talked about kind of some of those non-linearities that kick in, things like the IRMA breakpoint, that one extra dollar spikes your costs significantly, things like that. And that's another point that's interesting. In years past, we used to be able to convert, and the old rules were you could do a recharacterization of a Roth conversion. So we could go back after the fact, and we used to do this. We'd go back in the early part of the next year, figure out what AGI we wanted, and we would recharacterize just enough to push us back down under. We'd do two projections, one before the year ended and one after. The IRS caught on to our little scheme, and they did away with that.
By caught on, you don't mean us at McLean. You just mean in general. Let's just. I'm like, I don't want to knock on my door tomorrow, Rob.
It was a joke. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they figured out that probably wasn't the best approach, and they changed the legislation. So now you can't recharacterize a Roth conversion. Once you pick your number, you're kind of stuck with it. So.
because the other trick, you could convert a bunch of different assets, and then the ones that subsequently gained in value, you keep the conversion. The ones that lost in
Right.
value, you
Right.
recharacterize back and try again next year. But yeah, I think we've covered quite a bit.
There is
Maybe
that.
one.
Go on.
Yeah, are you getting to the backdoor Roth and just
Yeah, why don't you
deployment
just to make
confusion?
sure, because it's some people sometimes when you just say Roth in their heads they have backdoor in parentheses,
Yeah,
and you may
backdoor
not be
Roth.
you know that's not what you were talking about. But go on. One is
Well,
pre-retirement, one's post, etc. Wait.
yeah, there's a pro rata rule that if you have non-deductible contributions in your IRA, whenever you do a Roth conversion, you have to do the proportion. You can't decide, I only want to move non-deductible contributions. You have to do prorated based on what percentage of the overall accounts across all your IRAs are deductible and growth versus non-deductible. That's not a problem for the Roth conversions we've been talking about in these episodes. But if you're simply doing a backdoor Roth conversion where you're still working, your income exceeds the thresholds allowed for a direct Roth contribution, you contribute non-deductible funds into your IRA, and then a week later convert those funds to the Roth IRA, the pro rata rule could get you. And so that's where discussions of the pro rata rule become relevant. But what we're talking about, the pro rata rule idea is just actually, for a Roth conversion, you're not going to pay taxes on 100% of the conversion. That's kind of a nice feature.
Yeah, no, that's true. And a couple of other points we chatted about, but we haven't talked about it yet in the episode, is some other considerations like what state you're going to reside in retirement.
Oh
So
yeah.
if you're in a high tax income tax state in the year of conversion, but hey, we're gonna retire down to Florida where there's no income tax, that's another factor in the calculation, that there might be a few percentage points there that you're paying more to convert that you won't pay when you're pulling from a pre-tax IRA. So another, just a consideration to make sure that you plug in when you're doing all the math for this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does that cover it? Or any other tips and tricks, Rob, from the front lines that may differ from not may differ, but that are more nuanced, similar to how
Yeah,
you pointed out that it's when you're going to spend it, not so much your average tax rate at retirement, that can add color to the decision making. Like, what wisdom would folks
yeah,
have other than just hey, this is the decision tree, but there's always more than that in life.
yeah. If you're not inclined to go down that path of all the subtle nuances that we've talked about, right, of where do we think, tax policy is going to go years in the future, you could take a very simplistic approach and just try to get a sense for your future tax rate when it will come out, and then try not to exceed that. That would be like a really, really basic. So, let's say you're in the 22% bracket, and you might want to fill up that bracket with Roth conversions serially over a period of years while you have that opportunity to do so. So that, so that's often where we're going. And when we perform a tax projection, we're looking at all those issues, right? Tax brackets, we're looking at the IRMA breakpoints, we're looking at capital gains effects if those are still in play. So we're kind of trying to keep track of everything that's going on, because this is a dial that's completely discretionary. A lot of things on our tax return are not discretionary, right? Whether it's W-2 pay that's coming in, or RMDs, or Social Security. But the dollar amount we decide to generate as income in terms of a Roth conversion, we're in absolute control of that. So it's great to incorporate a tax projection with that, right? Because we can dial that in exactly where we want it. We can place the AGI just under a breakpoint that makes sense for the client.
That's amazing, and I'm just struck by a lot of work goes on in these kind of decisions that are quite nuanced and interesting. How do you balance? And we can end with that. And I think we did it with directionally. but I want to leave the listeners with something along the lines of, if I wanted to do this, what would be the first step that I would take to begin to even analyze this?
Yeah.
And, you know, we can leave it at that.
Because it's, great question. I think because it is such a tax driven decision, it has to start with taxes. So, you have to have a sense of what is your bracket now. So if you don't know that or don't know how to calculate it, then connect with an advisor, connect with your accountant. If you're sharp enough to plug it all into TurboTax or whatever software you use, plug it into last year's, try to get a sense for it. As advisors, we have pretty advanced tools that help us perform a really accurate tax projection year to year. But that's the first step, right? You got to figure out the tax piece. And then it's, as we mentioned, fairly complicated assumptions to figure out what we're comparing to. And then come up with a plan. Like you said, Alex, it's not chiseled in stone. You don't have to execute the same dollar amount of Roth conversions every year. You can change it over time as situations change. But again, getting back to that hedging thing, getting it started, we're at least converting some, we're creating a larger tax exempt bucket, we're opening up more flexibility in retirement. And if we do it right, we're paying a smaller amount in taxes now than we would later on. So it's a great strategy. I guess my biggest caution is making sure that it's measured and disciplined, and that we're not just all excited about it, going to go all in. That we do an appropriate amount each year.
Great.
Excellent.
And if anyone listening wants to follow up with you, Rob, and maybe even discuss whether their own situation might be something that you could provide some value to improving their financial situation, what's the best way for them to learn more about you and reach out to you?
Yeah, they can. I know on our the McLean website, McLean Asset Management, there's a section about the team. So there's a bio for the advisors. There's a way to reach out to contact one of us there, mcleanam.com. So happy to connect with anybody who needs it.
Great. And to spell that for the audience.
Oh yeah, we do this with everyone.
Spell McLean. So
yeah, but let's see how you do it. Do the URL. How do you spell out the URL?
McLeanam for asset management.com.
All right, there it is. And the last one I'll say is in the show notes, Wade and I are setting up for a Q&A session. So we will have a link where if you have questions, hit us up on the show notes and type them in. And like I said, we're doing our best to do our talk radio version of Retire with Style, where we hit a question, but we want to answer questions that are, that you folks are having. So set them up, and we're going to try to do a big push for a lot of Q&A sessions towards the end of the year. All righty. Thank you, everyone, for listening in, and we'll catch you next week on Retire with Style.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.